Good afternoon. It's Leo Robinson with Spotlight on Chelsea. Today I have a special guest, Sarah Burns, who actually, I want to welcome you back to Chelsea.
Thank you.
And the reason I say I'm welcoming you back to Chelsea is we met during the Lewis Latimer Society Science Festival. And you were there to share with us your book. And I wanted to invite you back because I think it's an important piece of work that you did to look into tomorrow. Actually, and I did buy a book for my granddaughter, and I asked you to sign it for her, which you did. So I'd like to ask you, what is it about your book?
What my book is about?
Yes.
Yeah, so my book is about the journey of a girl named Karen who learns about polar bears actually in the North Pole losing their homes, and she gets really concerned about this, and she actually gets transported into this world. It's a futuristic world where there's a lot of lush greenery, and there's people who are walking and biking, and she sees sort of this idealistic world of what her current society could look like. And it sort of relates to climate change, and it relates to the environment, and what the world would look like if we transition to more renewable energy, like I know Massachusetts is currently doing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Chelsea, we did a lot of changeover with some of the diesel fuel to better serve our community, or the Chelsea fleet. But what inspired you to write the book?
Yeah, so I actually got inspired because I watched a TV show maybe 10 years back called Earth 2100. And it was about what the world would look like if we continued emitting fossil fuels. So it was actually sort of the opposite of what my book currently is. But it was very graphic. It had a lot of really beautiful illustrations, but they were, very sort of desolate. It was like this world where there was not a lot of greenery, and people were fighting over resources. And I just thought, while this is very interesting and while it motivates me, I don't know if it would motivate most people. And I would like to share this information about how to really make the world a better place in regards to the environment rather than making people scared. Because at that time when I watched it, a lot of my classmates were very scared and wary about approaching the topic of climate change.
Mm-hmm. Now, I bought the book for my granddaughter, and I read some parts of the book with her. What audience are you trying to target in regards to this book?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the age range is pretty wide. It's from 6 to 12. And the reason is because it is a picture book. So even if you don't understand all of the words, the pictures sort of explain what the book is about. 12 because it's also a very complex subject. So oftentimes the kids who are reading it who are a little bit younger have more questions, and then the older ones still have a lot of questions, but generally know a little bit more about the topic. I also am looking to target communities where there's kids who maybe don't feel as empowered generally, and want to be able to make a change. Because really the point of the book is I want to give the power to kids to make them feel like they can make a difference in their community.
Yeah, and I believe kids can make a difference in their community. When I have conversation with my granddaughter, who's only 4, sometime I think I'm speaking to a kid who's about 8 or 10.
Right.
But how did you choose the main character?
Yeah, so I actually went through a number of revisions throughout writing this book, and my first revision, or my first version of the book was actually featuring a character who looked kind of like a younger version of myself, and I didn't really notice it at the time. It was sort of subconscious, I just created this character. And then after a while, I started to realize that there's a lot of children of color who are underrepresented in the media, and I wanted to change the main character. I just realized that the reason I did it was because that was what I was used to. And I wanted to give people within those communities power to, feel like they could relate to the main character. And I also think that the world of the future is going to be one that's a lot more diverse, and you're going to see a lot of what you see in the book, which is a lot of mixed culture, a lot of mixed races. And that's really why I decided to choose her.
Well,
as the main character.
and I see that as our country changes and all the different ethnic groups who want to be here in America, the land of opportunity. I
Right.
mean, that's, what it's all about.
Right, definitely.
I talk about your journey through writing this book.
Yeah, so it was a pretty long journey, actually. It started, I guess, in high school, but like early high school. And it was actually when I was doing my Girl Scout Gold Award. I know that a lot of people in Chelsea are in Girl Scouts and Boy
Yes.
Scouts. So, and I was actually living in Fairfax, Virginia at the time.
okay.
And so my whole goal for the Gold Award was to teach kids about the environment as it relates to animals and endangered species. So I found different ways to teach them, and I remember thinking, there's no books out here that I can read that are about animals that are endangered, so let me just write one. And so this book actually started out as a book that was targeted to focus mostly on animals and how we could help maintain their spaces. And then over time, it actually changed because what I realized was that it's important to preserve animal spaces, but really the root of the problem is us changing the environment as a whole, which comes from energy. So it has a really big focus now on like solar power, wind power, hydroelectric power, and it focuses on the animals, but only a tiny bit. So it sort of just shifted in that way and kind of creates a more holistic picture of what the world could look like. Yeah.
And kids kind of relate to animals because as young
Right.
kids, you had your favorite teddy bear.
Yeah, and that's
So-
why, right, it starts out actually with the polar bears because, kids see bears and they can really relate to them. It's a friendly face and it's sort of the face of, climate change as well, so.
Now, what did you have to leave out that you couldn't put into the book?
Yeah, so as I sort of hinted at earlier, it did start out with more of an animal focus. So at the beginning, the book was mostly just about animals, and it was about how we can preserve their spaces. And so I actually left a lot of that out. I had to really cut it down. It was just a lot of information about animals. And then also, when I first started writing the book, I wrote it from sort of a high schooler's perspective because I didn't know how to talk to kids.
Yeah.
Never had any
Big
siblings
sibling.
growing up, never
Yeah.
had any, young cousins or anything. So I didn't really know how to talk to kids. And the words that I was using were pretty complex. And the ideas were a little bit difficult to explain. So I left a lot of that out.
Yeah.
I did a lot of cutting, but then at the same time did a lot more with the illustrations because of that. And then I guess one more thing is that when I started writing the book, there's actually a page that talks about light bulbs. And at the time I was writing it, compact fluorescent light bulbs, or CFLs, were the most energy efficient type of light bulb. But that actually changed while I was writing the book, so I had to modify it. And I changed it to LED light
light
bulbs. Yeah, so it really shows how fast the technology changes over time.
Yes. And Lewis Latimer developed a filament in the light bulb. so,
Right.
And you kind of made your way to the science festival with us.
Right, so he had his part in the book too.
And I noticed you want to translate the book into Japanese.
Right.
And why Japanese?
Yeah, I wanted to do Japanese because when I was growing up, we actually had a public school that taught us Japanese from an early age. And my parents signed me up for it. I don't think I really knew what I was getting into at that time.
Yeah.
But I just started with it and then really continued and really enjoyed it. And right now, Japan is still sort of in its early stages of transitioning off of nuclear energy. And it's also at a point where the renewable percentage of its entire electricity portfolio is still relatively small. So they're looking to expand and they're looking to get more solar and more hydro. And so it's a good book because right now it shows what their future could look like. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because, as I mentioned to you, my daughter had coached at MIT for a while. And
Right.
one of the things at the end of the year, they have the basketball players and families and everybody come in, and everybody kind of gives a little blurb on what they studied. And a lot of people who actually took Japanese.
Really?
Yeah, because
That's
a
so
lot of
interesting.
them, and a lot of them transitioned overseas for jobs, and then they had the Japanese to go along with being able to apply for a job.
That's amazing.
Now, are you going to look to translate it into other languages?
Yeah, I definitely am. I actually really want to translate it into Spanish. So that's one thing that I'm looking at. I don't know Spanish, so I will need to, find someone who knows Spanish. That would be really helpful.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is because, first of all, a lot of people speak Spanish in the United States. And then second of all, there's such a huge solar market in Latin America right now. And I think it would be a really good way to explain sort of why the solar panels are there. I know there's some communities who have solar panels being built like in their backyards, and it might be a nice way to explain to them that this is a good thing. It's not just something that's being built in your backyard that you don't know too much about. It's actually something that will really help the community.
Yeah, and it's pretty interesting because going back to like in the 1980s, the local community action programs had a program where they were introducing solar panels to homeowners. And at that time really didn't take off or really go anywhere. But now you see a lot of people with the solar panels on their houses.
Right.
And, saving energy and whatnot.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law happens to be one of them,
That's good to take advantage of those programs, the incentives are pretty good too.
And how is the look into tomorrow different from other books?
Yeah, I would say it's different largely because instead of talking about the issue of climate change, it really doesn't focus on the issue too much. It just focuses on what we could have, this beautiful society with a lot of trees, a lot of greenery, people who walk outside in order to get where they need to go. A lot more connection with nature, I think, in society. And I think it's really desirable. So it doesn't really scare the reader away, which is something that I had felt in the past when I would look at documentaries or when I would read books about climate change. It was always very scary and I felt like I couldn't do anything about it. But this book shows it in a positive way, and not only that, but it shows how the main character can change so that her current world that she lives in is more like the one that she visits.
What would you want your audience to take away from the book?
Yeah, so I would want them to really feel that they can relate to the main character and that they really see themselves in her and feel that they, just like her, can make a difference in their community, can speak up to adults and ask, if they want to have solar panels built on the roofs, or, if they want to start a rooftop garden or something, because it really doesn't hurt to ask. And once you do, you can actually make a difference. So I would want that for them.
Oh, good. Once again, I'm here with my guest, Sarah Burns, Chelsea Happenings with Leo Robinson. I'm glad to have you here today. Now you have a chance to be able to speak to our audience, to let them know how they can obtain the book, what you want them to walk away with. So,
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I do have an upcoming website for the book, but for now I do have a Facebook page, so I'll share the link with you for that. In order to obtain the book, you can also go on Barnes & Noble's website and just search A Look Into Tomorrow. And even if you go on Google, you can search A Look Into Tomorrow and it should show up as well.
well, once again, I'd like to thank you, and I'd like for people to be able to go out and buy the book, and actually, hopefully we'll be able to have you back in February during Black History Month, and
Yeah,
maybe
that'd be great.
maybe do a reading at the high school, or come back into the studio and we'll do a follow-up as to where things are. And once again, I'd like to thank you for being here today and being my guest.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thanks so much.
I'd like to thank Community Cable, Paula Batchelor and Ricky, who makes everything work here. So once again, thank you, Ricky.